Abandoned military bases with dark histories. Military bases around the world have long carried an aura of secrecy, from hidden underwater lairs to fortified shelters buried in remote icy wastelands. Governments have constructed astonishing facilities concealed from the public eye. While many sites remain classified today, others were abandoned over time only to be discovered in the decades that followed. These deserted bases offer windows into clandestine military operations throughout history. Get ready as we uncover 10 abandoned military bases shrouded in intrigue, controversy, and chilling legacies that linger to this day. Number 10. Fort Drum, the concrete battleship of Manila Bay. In the early 1900s, the United States military chose a small, rocky island in the Philippines as the location for a formidable coastal fortress named Fort Drum. Nicknamed the concrete battleship, the facility resembled a floating citadel. Construction began in 1909, led by the Army Corps of Engineers. The rocky terrain was transformed into a fortified complex outfitted with imposing 14-inch gun batteries to defend Manila Bay. Fort Drum had 20-foot thick concrete walls that made it impervious to enemy bombardment. During World War II, Japan captured the base and held it until 1945. American forces had to burn fuel oil and ignite it to drive the enemy from the flaming, ruined fort. Today, the haunting remains of Fort Drum sit abandoned off the coast of the Philippines as a ghostly relic from World War II in the Pacific. The dilapidated stronghold serves as a reminder of the horrifying wartime battlegrounds that scattered the region decades ago. Number 9. Johnston Atoll, from nuclear test to biowarfare site. In the remote Pacific lies Johnston Atoll, a former nuclear testing site the US military used to conduct biological weapons experiments in the 1960s. Johnston Atoll's secret history began in the 1930s when it was converted into an American naval base. Soon afterward, it became a launch site for nuclear missile tests. The military then abandoned Johnston Atoll in 1963 once nuclear testing concluded. Shockingly, several years later, the government again chose Johnston Atoll as the location for covert chemical weapons projects. Open-air testing exposed the islands to Agent Orange and other dangerous materials. The base also hosted biological weapons tests that released airborne toxins and viruses, including anthrax. Atomic bombs, chemical agents, biological hazards. Johnston Atoll suffered them all before the site was finally closed and declared a wildlife refuge. Number 8. Camp Century, America's buried Arctic military base. Beneath the desolate surface of the Greenland ice sheet lies the abandoned remains of Camp Century, a secret Cold War military base the US Army built under the guise of conducting polar research in the 1950s. In reality, it housed hidden nuclear missiles pointed at the Soviet Union. Constructed 2,000 feet below the frigid surface, Camp Century became a sprawling underground complex with tunnels branching out for miles in all directions. The covert base had its own power supply and was capable of housing 200 soldiers for months at a time. However, the polar ice proved less stable than anticipated. Melting and shifting started collapsing tunnels, forcing the military to abandon Camp Century in 1967. Today, it remains buried and abandoned deep in the Arctic, with its nuclear waste posing a contamination threat as climate change accelerates glacial melting. Camp Century exemplifies the chilling yet fragile nature of secret military sites entombed within remote and hostile environments. Number 7. Hashima Island, Japan's restricted battleship island. Perched off the coast of southern Japan, Hashima Island remains one of the country's most secretive former military sites. This isolated 16-acre island housed a major undersea coal mining operation starting in the late 1800s. The large concrete apartment buildings constructed across Hashima resembled a giant battleship, hence its nickname Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island. During World War II, the Japanese government used Korean and Chinese forced laborers to work in the dangerous mines under harsh conditions. Once one of the most densely populated places on Earth with over 5,000 residents in 1959, Hashima was suddenly abandoned when the mines closed in 1974. Today, it remains largely off-limits to visitors as a grim reminder of wartime atrocities. With its imposing vacant buildings, Hashima stands like an eerie time capsule. Number 6. Carlstrom Field, Florida's haunted World War II air base. A pristine green airfield in Florida may seem peaceful today, but it was once a bustling military flight school named Carlstrom Field. The base opened in 1941 to train pilots for World War II combat missions. It continued operations during the Korean and Vietnam Wars as well. But Karlstrom Field later took on a more unsettling purpose when it became the G. Pierce Wood Memorial Hospital for veterans and soldiers with catastrophic injuries. Stories of phantom nurses and doctors haunting the decaying hospital still circulate following its closure in the 2000s. While parts of the former airbase were revitalized into schools and commercial sites, deserted buildings at Karlstrom Field remain off-limits due in part to these ghostly tales. The usually quiet base continues to echo with legacy of its service during the tumultuous 20th century wars. Number 5. Greenbrier Bunker, America's secret congressional hideout. The Greenbrier Luxury Resort in West Virginia harbors a fascinating hidden secret. A buried Cold War bunker built to house the U.S. Congress in the event of nuclear war. Known as Project Greek Island, construction of the vast underground shelter for congressional leaders stayed concealed from the public for 30 years until the Washington Post exposed it in 1992. Had a nuclear attack struck Washington, D.C., the Greenbrier bunker stood ready to receive Congress and keep the government functioning deep beneath the luxury retreat. This elaborate contingency plan reflected Cold War fears of Soviet missiles raining down on American cities. After remaining vacant following declassification, today parts of the bunker are open for tours at the Greenbrier Hotel as a reminder of the terrifying nuclear tensions that once gripped the nation. Number 4. Kalama Atoll, America's forgotten Pacific test site. Scattered across the remote Pacific Ocean, the Kalama Atoll Islands were the scene of dangerous Cold War activities by the U.S. military starting in the 1950s. Kalama Atoll hosted nuclear weapons testing, biological warfare experiments, and chemical weapons storage until the 1970s. Thousands of tons of hazardous materials contaminated Kalama Atoll's soil, inflicting environmental damages that took decades to remediate. Workers incinerated weapons stockpiles downwind of the islands. Veterans stationed there later suffered radiation-linked illnesses. Today, Kalama Atoll remains nearly forgotten among the Pacific Islands. Designated an unincorporated U.S. territory, the ravaged and desolated atoll serves as a cautionary example of the consequences when military sites become dumping grounds for the most toxic products of war. Number 3. Balaclava Submarine Base, USSR's secret Arctic lair. Carved inside a mountain on the Crimean Peninsula lies Balaclava, an enormous secret submarine base the Soviet Union constructed at the height of the Cold War in 1957. The sprawling underground complex could withstand a direct atomic attack, according to Soviet leaders. Within the thick rocky walls, the naval installation had hidden submarine pens, enormous storage areas, a secret command center, and tunnels big enough for trucks to drive through. After the Cold War, Ukraine took control of Balaclava and used it as a naval museum. But Russia seized the submarine base alongside with Crimea in 2014 and has kept its activities there highly classified ever since. With Balaclava back in Moscow's hands, its future mission remains unknown. Number 2. Monsell Army Sea Forts, UK's abandoned oceanic outposts. In the Thames River estuary stand the long-deserted Monsell Army Sea Forts. Originally built by the British military to defend against German forces during World War II, the armed towers were strategically positioned miles offshore to improve visibility and provide early warning of attacks. Each circular complex had multiple levels with living quarters, operations rooms, and heavy firepower like anti-aircraft guns to counter airstrikes. But after the war ended, the Monsell forts were decommissioned. Lacking maintenance, some eventually sank while the remaining stark towers remain abandoned. Plans are in the works to possibly convert them into luxury hotels, but for now they exist as creepy relics in the sea spotted by the occasional passerby. Number 1. Belitz Military Hospital, Germany's abandoned wartime hospital. The century-old Belitz Military Hospital 60 miles from Berlin is one of the eeriest abandoned sites tied to Germany's wartime past. Constructed in the early 1900s, Belitz originally served as a sanatorium before caring for World War I soldiers, including a young Adolf Hitler. Belitz later became a major military hospital during World War II as well. Damaged in 1945, the vacant ruins were then taken over by the Soviet administration following Germany's surrender. Sections eventually reopened as a civilian neurological center before finally closing in the 1990s. Today, most of Belitz remains sealed off due to contamination and decay. However, its treatment of Adolf Hitler still draws fascination. The sprawling derelict hospital represents the horrors of 20th century warfare that soldiers experienced within its walls, making it one of Germany's most chilling deserted sites. Conclusion. From top-secret nuclear bunkers to seafaring gun towers, abandoned bases worldwide offer haunting glimpses of militarism throughout recent history. While many details remain classified, their existence alone speaks to the extreme lengths governments undertook for security, to the detriment of the environment and human lives. What other mysteries await discovery as more abandoned, forgotten sites inevitably resurface in the decades ahead? As history demonstrates, wherever military forces once operated in secrecy, the truth will eventually come to light.